Today, we can simply open a refrigerator and take out cold drinks, burgers, and other food whenever we want. We can heat our meals in an oven or microwave, and food preservation is something we rarely have to worry about. But thousands of years ago, how did people keep their food from spoiling? Early humans lived in natural caves and hunted animals for food. After a successful hunt, the whole group would gather together and enjoy a large meal. But after everyone had eaten their fill, a large amount of meat was still left behind. The next morning, they discovered a serious problem. The leftover meat had changed color, flies were surrounding it, and it had begun to spoil. After tasting it, one of them became sick and realized that raw meat could not simply be left lying around. The next time they returned from a hunt, they tried a new idea. Instead of leaving the meat on the ground, they hung pieces of it high in a tree. But after several hot days in the sun, the meat began to smell bad. Even vultures started eating it. Their second attempt had failed too. Then one day, a powerful storm arrived. Heavy rain fell and the temperature suddenly dropped. Hail and ice covered the land, and a small animal became buried beneath the frozen ground. Several days later, the ice began to melt. When the people found the frozen animal, they were amazed. The meat was still fresh. There were no flies and there was no bad smell. They cut into the meat and discovered that it had become extremely hard from the cold. The early humans began to understand something important. Extreme cold could stop food from spoiling. This was one of the earliest natural forms of freezing. They began searching for a dark, cold place inside the rocky cave. They brought ice inside and stored meat in the cold pit. Even after a week, the meat was still safe to eat. The people were delighted. They had discovered their first reliable method of preserving food. But ice was not always available. When summer arrived, the ice melted, and the danger of spoiled food returned. So they began searching for another solution. One day, someone was roasting meat near a fire. A piece slipped from his hand and became trapped above the flames where it was surrounded by smoke instead of burning directly in the fire. After staying in the smoke for a long time, the meat became darker and drier. Someone picked it up and took a bite. Most of the moisture inside had disappeared, and the meat had become hard. They left the dried meat in a corner of the cave to see what would happen. 1 week passed, then another, but the meat still had not spoiled. The early humans had discovered two more methods: smoking and drying. They built a simple wooden platform outside the cave. A small fire burned underneath, creating plenty of smoke. Thin pieces of meat were placed above it. The heat and smoke slowly removed moisture from the meat. They did not know about bacteria or fungi, but they learned through experience that food stayed safer when it became dry. After several days, the meat became hard and dry, almost like chips. They placed the dried pieces into leather bags. Even when hunting was unsuccessful, they could still eat this preserved food. They soon discovered that the same idea worked with fruit. Wild grapes and figs were spread out on large stones under the hot sun. After drying in the sunlight, the fruit became smaller, sweeter, and more concentrated in flavor. This was the beginning of sun drying. The shelves inside the cave gradually filled with dried meat and fruit. But one day, a powerful wind blew through the area and scattered their stored food. They realized that drying food was not enough. It also needed to be protected and stored safely. So they began digging deep holes in the ground. They lined the sides with large leaves, placed the dried food inside, and covered everything with soil. The cool, dark, and airless environment helped protect the food. This was an early form of underground food storage, similar to root cellaring. The hidden storage also made it harder for wild animals to find the food. Their food security had improved once again. But when they later dug up the storage pit, they discovered another problem. Ants and insects had damaged much of the food. Once again, they needed a better solution. Near a river, they collected wet clay and shaped it into a round container. Then they left the container in the sun until it became hard. They had created one of humanity's earliest forms of pottery. They began placing dried fruit and meat inside the clay containers. The openings were sealed with tree bark and clay. Now, air and insects had much less chance of getting inside. One day, near a salty area, they noticed that water had disappeared from cracks in the rocks, leaving behind a white powder. Curious, they tasted the powder. The salty flavor made them react with surprise. Later, some of the salt accidentally fell onto a piece of raw meat. After several hours, they noticed that moisture was being drawn out of the meat, and it was becoming firmer. They placed the salted meat under the hot sun. It dried much faster than ordinary meat. The early humans had discovered one of the most powerful natural preservatives. They began collecting salt and storing meat with it. Layers of salt and meat were placed inside large clay containers. The salt helped remove moisture and made it much harder for harmful microorganisms to grow. The result was not only safer food, but also food with a strong and delicious flavor. Now they had three powerful tools: ice, smoke, and sunlight, and salt. They also began collecting honey. They discovered that when certain fruits were kept surrounded by honey, they could remain preserved for a very long time. Another natural method of preserving food had been discovered. One day, the group successfully hunted a huge wild animal. This time, they did not have to fear that all the meat would quickly spoil. The entire group worked together. Some meat was preserved with salt, while other pieces were dried and smoked over the fire. Soon, the area around the cave was filled with clay containers and hanging dried meat. Their natural cave storage almost looked like a food storehouse. The hunters no longer had to live with the constant fear of hunger. They could sit together and enjoy their food with greater peace of mind. Then the weather suddenly changed. Dark clouds filled the sky and heavy rain continued for weeks. The surrounding forest flooded, making it impossible to travel outside safely. Many wild animals struggled because they could no longer find enough food. But inside the cave, the people were safe. They opened their clay containers and brought out preserved, salted meat. After warming it over the fire, they shared the meal together. A small child was given a piece of dried fruit and happily ate it. The people understood that they had learned how to protect themselves from nature's difficult seasons. One of them even drew pictures of a large clay pot and salt on the cave wall using charcoal. The drawing showed how food preservation had changed their lives. Eventually, the flood ended and the land returned to normal. The ability to preserve food helped the human community survive difficult times and grow larger. But humans were not finished experimenting. They discovered that animal fat could also be used to preserve food. The white fat from an animal could be melted into a liquid similar to oil. The melted fat was poured into a clay container. Small pieces of dried meat were placed inside it. When the fat cooled and hardened, it surrounded the meat and sealed it away from the air. This created a highly durable preserved food, similar to what later cultures would call pemmican. It was almost like an ancient energy bar. With long-lasting food available, people became more confident about traveling long distances. They packed preserved meat and other food into leather bags and began exploring new areas. Even when they could not find fresh animals to hunt, their journey did not have to stop. Eventually, they reached a beautiful river valley and began building a new life there. As they started growing crops, they discovered another problem. Grain could also spoil if it became damp. So they stored grain in deep underground pits and covered it with ash. The ash helped protect the grain from insects and moisture. As a result, grains could remain usable for much longer periods. People could now save a large part of what they produced for the future. Food waste was greatly reduced. By this time, the once young hunter had become an older and wiser leader. He gathered the younger generation and taught them the preservation techniques that had been learned over many years. The young people listened carefully as they learned how to use smoke, salt, drying, and storage. Every family had a place to store food beneath or near their natural shelter. Whether the danger was winter, flooding, or drought, the community was now better prepared. Human intelligence had given people an advantage over many wild animals. A tiger or lion could hunt and eat, but it could not preserve food for the future. A hungry wild animal had to search for its next meal. Humans, however, could store food and survive difficult seasons. As time passed, the prehistoric community continued to grow. Their clay containers became stronger and better shape. They also began using dried herbs and leaves to improve the taste of their preserved food. Eventually, the old leader grew very old. Near the end of his life, he passed his walking stick to his capable son. The entire community respected him because his ideas had helped protect generations of people from hunger. One evening, he sat outside the natural rocky cave and looked across the golden fields. He could see how far his people had come. He felt that his community had defeated much of its fear of hunger and spoiled food. Human intelligence had helped people work with nature and survive its challenges. After a life filled with discovery and purpose, the old man peacefully closed his eyes. His journey had ended, but his knowledge would live on. Thousands of years began to pass in just moments. Human beings continued learning, changing and improving the ways they preserved food. Ancient clay containers slowly became stronger and more advanced. Over time, people created glass jars and sealed metal cans. Human shelters also changed across thousands of years. Then came another revolutionary idea: refrigeration. The ancient discovery that cold could protect food eventually became the modern refrigerator. After thousands of years of change, the story finally returned to the modern world. Today, we simply open a refrigerator and heat our food in a microwave. It feels completely normal to us. But the basic idea behind keeping food cold is incredibly old. Ancient humans were already discovering the power of ice and cold. An ancient ice-filled pit and a modern refrigerator may look completely different. Ancient people dried meat with heat and smoke. Today, we still use the same basic idea in many kinds of dried food. It grew from thousands of small discoveries and experiments. Every small experiment made by our ancestors helped build the future. Their simple ideas slowly became the technology we use today. The modern world now has incredible ways to preserve food, but food should not be wasted. Two people from completely different times can be connected by the same story. One began the journey and the other lives with the results. So the next time you open your refrigerator, remember the long journey that made it possible. Thanks for watching this journey through the history of food preservation.